What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is January 31st, 2026, about 6 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our Book to React series with a new book. This is Book 18, Episode 1 of Revolutionary Suicide, written by the legendary activist Huey P. Newton. One of my heroes, because not only was he a founding member of the Black Panther Party, a revolutionary vanguard party for the working class, for the poor, for the dispossessed, for the oppressed, and for black people specifically, but he was also from my hometown, Monroe, Louisiana. Wow. Yes, indeed. So I've always had a love for Huey P because he stepped where I stomped. You know what I mean? Anyway, we're going to be reading this book today, and we're only going to be covering a few sections of the book. I have 2 copies of the text, the PDF I was able to find online, and if you want to hook up on books, holla at me. I could get you hooked up for free. But yeah, I have 2 copies of this book. I won't be reading from this one with the double pages copied because it's too annoying to scroll like that, especially on the stream. But I might come back to it if there are missing pages in the other PDF that I have, which is more streamlined here, as you see, with all the text right here. So for today, we're going to be reading from the dedication page onto the introduction, and then onto part 1, which is the manifesto, the whole entire section. So we're going to be reading only a few pages of this autobiography that I really don't hear mentioned by anybody else. I don't hear people bring up Huey P. Newton's writings as much as it should be brought up. We love to talk about the Black Panthers and wax poetic about the Black Panthers, but I find very scant resources or references or mention of Huey P's actual literary work. So without further ado, let's get into it. Revolutionary Suicide. Huey P. Newton was born in Monroe, Louisiana on February 17th, 1942, to Walter and Armelia Newton. He is the co-founder of the revolutionary Marxist-Leninist organization, the Black Panther Party, and was the party's ranking leader and chief ideologue and strategist. In 1966, Newton enrolled in Merritt College in Oakland, where he became a member of the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. I didn't know he was a Sigma. I forgot, are the Sigmas like the ones that do the barking, like, oh, oh? I forgot. Are the Sigmas the one that get the branding on them? Anyway, so Huey became a Sigma, and he led the effort to establish the first Black history course and met Bobby Seale in Merritt College in Oakland in the late 1960s. In October 1966, Newton and Seale founded what was then known as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. The party urged members to challenge the status quo with armed patrols of the impoverished streets of Black Oakland and to form coalitions with organizations representing other oppressed groups. Internationally, Newton directed the representing other oppressed groups. Sorry. Let's read that again, because recently the Black Panthers have come up. There's a new vanguard party that claims to carry on the mantle of the Panthers, and people are attacking them for defending illegal immigrants or undocumented people, however you want to frame them, in the United States from attacks from ICE, immigration, customs enforcement, or border patrol. Basically, Trump's armed Gestapo force marching through American streets, murdering American citizens. And there are people criticizing the new Black Panthers for standing up for immigrants. Let's read this here. So, in October 1966, Newton and Seale founded what was then known as the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. The party urged members to challenge the status quo with armed patrols of the impoverished streets of Black Oakland and to form coalitions with organizations representing other oppressed groups. Internationally, Newton directed the party to form coalitions with the Vietnamese, Chinese, and Cubans, as with, among others, African national liberation organizations like FRELIMO in Mozambique, ZANU in Zimbabwe, and the ANC in South Africa. Within 1 year of the party's founding, in October 1967, Newton was wounded and arrested by Oakland police and charged with the murder of a police officer, spawning the worldwide protest that came to be known as the Free Huey movement. Convicted of manslaughter, Newton was released in July 1970 for a new trial. He would be tried on this charge several times thereafter, but never convicted. Upon his release, he led the party's more than 40 chapters to build up its community service programs, called survival programs, operating under the slogan, "Survival Pending Revolution." From the outset, the party was a target for elimination by the U.S. government under the FBI's infamous COINTELPRO, or counterintelligence program, which openly stated that its agenda was to disrupt or destroy the party. By 1981, the party had been driven into its demise. In the aftermath, Newton earned a PhD from the University of California, Santa Cruz, publishing his dissertation, War Against the Panthers, a study of repression in the United States. Prior to that, Newton had authored Revolutionary Suicide and To Die for the People, in addition to numerous other treatises and articles, and was the co-author with psychoanalyst Erik Erikson of the book In Search of Common Ground. On August 22, 1989, Newton was tragically shot to death on the blighted streets of West Oakland, leaving behind his widow, Frederica Newton. Frederica Newton was raised in Berkeley, California, by her mother, Arlene Slaughter. She attended Wesleyan University, where she earned her BA. Prior to that, in 1969, as a young teenager, Mrs. Newton joined the Black Panther Party, and in 1970, she met Huey P. Newton. In 1984, after the demise of the party, they married. In the wake of Huey P. Newton's death in 1989, Frederica Newton, along with former Black Panther leader David Hilliard, established the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation, a nonprofit educational corporation. She continues to serve as the foundation's president and oversees its archive, materials, publications, and other activities, including a number of community-based programs. So, rest in peace, Huey P. A tragedy that the U.S. government tore down this amazing organization, which we will learn more about throughout this text. So that was the introduction written by his wife, Frederica Newton, who just gave her brief bio as well. She from the Yay area. Anyway, let's go to the dedication here. It says, "For my mother and father, who have given me strength and made me unafraid of death and therefore unafraid of life." Beautiful. Let's go here to the introduction. It has been 20 years since my late husband, Huey P. Newton, was shot and killed on the same streets of Oakland, California, that had witnessed his dramatic ascent as leader of the Black Panther Party 2 decades earlier. From 1966, when the party was founded, to its demise around 1980, Huey stood at the vanguard of the Black liberation movement. For most people then and now, this legendary role is best personified in a photograph taken at the behest of Eldridge Cleaver, who sought to make a militant public statement about the party and its leader. In the picture, Huey is seated in a tall wicker chair and looking defiantly at the camera, a rifle held in his right hand and a spear in his left. Eldridge's intended message was a symbolic bridging of the spear and the gun, or put another way, the transference of the cultural nationalism of the past to a revolutionary culture in the future. The cultural nationalism of the past to a revolutionary culture in the future. Sorry, I got distracted right here. Okay, the volatile image resonated deeply in an era marked by scores of riots and rebellions in black communities across the country. Later, when the photograph appeared on the cover of Revolutionary Suicide, the image of Huey as the intrepid African-American freedom fighter was further cemented in the public's consciousness. As with all controversial figures, however, there were complicated and unseen dimensions beneath the famous public persona, which his autobiography makes abundantly clear. looking forward to reading more about the contradictions that even his wife is going to bring up here, because she knew the man better than we ever will, right? And very interesting to learn the story about this picture. I think everybody who is, semi-conscious, semi-woke has seen this picture of Huey P. But I didn't know the story that Eldridge Cleaver wanted Huey to take the picture. And if you don't know who Eldridge Cleaver was, he was also a famous black activist as well, who was a member of the Black Panther Party. I believe he was the Minister of Information. So he was basically the public speaking face for the party, dealing with the media and things like that. He also wrote a famous book called Soul on Ice and went into exile in Algeria, then came back to America and became a Republican. And as far as I know, he is still alive, though don't quote me on that. Anyway, Eldridge Cleaver wanted Huey to take this picture as to show the bridging of the rifle, the traditional African weapon, and then the spear, the traditional African weapon, and its transference to the rifle, right? And I guess the grand big wicker chair is just to create some aura. I mean, the picture is just full of aura. It's total aura farming. We're going to continue here, right? So, continuing. So, when Revolutionary Suicide was first published in 1973, readers were offered a rare glimpse into the private life of the party's founder. Not that people hadn't been reading and hearing all about Huey for years. He started making local headlines when he and Bobby Seale launched the Black Panther Party in Oakland. Their armed self-defense patrols of the police caused an immediate stir in the press, so much so that a conservative state assemblyman introduced legislation the following year that proposed outlawing the party's constitutional right to bear arms. One can imagine the alarm felt in Sacramento when a caravan of Black Panthers with rifles appeared on the steps of the state capitol to protest the Panther Bill. As with the police patrols, this demonstration was performed in full accordance with the law. Huey was a dedicated student of the California Penal Code and made certain the party's actions were legal. People today often don't realize that walking down the street with a rifle was within the laws of the time. White racist militia groups like the Minutemen and the John Birch Society, for example, had in fact been driving through our communities with guns displayed for some time. Although these groups were better armed than the Black Panthers, the ruling establishment did not perceive whites with guns to be a threat to their interests, and no attempt was made to curtail their activities. Once the Panther Bill was finally passed in the spring of '67, Huey brought an end to the open display of firearms. Nevertheless, guns would continue to be closely associated with him, whether he chose them to be or not. This association reached new heights that fall when Huey was charged with shooting and killing an Oakland police officer. He had been stopped in his car early one morning while looking for parking. Most local officers knew Huey by sight, making police harassment a routine procedure for him. Without asking for identification, the officer identified Huey by name, going so far as to ridicule him as the great Huey P. Newton. He then ordered Huey from the car and proceeded to knock him to the ground with an unexpected blow to the face. Shots were fired and the officer dropped over dead. Huey maintained that he was innocent, insisting that an unknown gunman had fired the shots. To the city fathers, this was an open and shut case of murder. The most famous Black American revolutionary since Malcolm X had acted out his rage against the police. For the black masses and the white New Left, however, the charge became a cause célèbre. The movement to free Huey coalesced overnight, with hundreds of supporters taking to the streets to protest his innocence. Meanwhile, journalists from around the United States and abroad descended on Oakland to report on the sensational trial, providing the Black Panthers for the first time with not only a national, but also an international stage. Millions of people who had been fed the establishment's slander against the party since its inception were now given the opportunity to meet its well-spoken leader and listen to its platform laid out by him. This exposure led to a rapid period of growth for the Black Panthers over the next 2 years, so much so that when Huey was acquitted and released from prison in 1971, he barely recognized the party or its members. What once had been a local phenomenon of a dozen comrades now counted more than 40 chapters throughout the United States, as well as those in Australia, Polynesia, England, India, Israel, and Algeria, where our international section was headquartered. Once again, for all the people who are out there saying, oh, the Black Panthers need to only focus on black people, specifically black people in America, the literal Black Panthers that y'all worship, that y'all love, had offices in Australia, Polynesia, England, India, Israel, and Algeria, connecting with comrades all across the world and fighting with those comrades for their rights as well as for ours. So let's not do this divisive bullshit that people want us to do, where we're separating our struggle against capitalism and racism and white supremacy in America from the people in Gaza who are fighting against those same forces just under a different name. Let's continue here. Huey left prison a major celebrity, which was an identity he did not want or welcome. He understood that leaders of social protest movements had frequently been turned into celebrities by the media, and the effectiveness of these individuals to lead was destroyed in the process. Besides, genuine social change didn't come from celebrities, Huey argued, but from the people themselves. He never lost sight of the fact that only the masses had the ability to transform society, and that the party's slogan, "All Power to the People," was a potent testament to this belief. Still, he couldn't fully escape the trappings of his iconic status. In spite of his resistance, Huey personified the Black liberation movement at a time when African Americans were in desperate need of leadership. The civil rights movement had wound down with some of its most prominent figureheads murdered and the movement splintered. The Black Panthers stepped into this historical gulf, and their rise marked a transform from civil rights agitation per se to a revolutionary cause demanding nothing less than a comprehensive restructuring of American life, everything from its institutions and laws to its basic economic system. What's more, the party now had the numbers and influences to make demands of their country. Needless to say, the U.S. government was well aware of this turn of events, and the counterintelligence efforts that for years had been aimed at monitoring and creating friction among African American radicals intensified. Huey's celebrity served to further this scrutiny. The FBI, in its own words, sought to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of the Black nationalist. Never mind that Huey hadn't been a Black nationalist since college. Let's repeat that. Frederica Newton, his widow wife, says Huey P. Newton himself was not a Black nationalist. Okay? Bujo said hi. Hi, Bujo. Hi to you, Bujo. Shout out to you. Anyway, continuing here. Never mind that Huey P. Newton hadn't been a Black nationalist since college, nor was the party a Black nationalist group. I repeat, the Black Panther Party, according to Frederica Newton, who was a member of the Black Panther Party while Huey P. Newton was alive and was Huey P. Newton's wife, says here in Huey P. Newton's autobiography, the Black Panthers were not a Black nationalist group. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, however, was determined to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah by any means necessary. The full extent of the government's surveillance of the party, to the extent that it can ever be known in full, was not revealed until the 1980s, long after Revolutionary Suicide was published. Huey, therefore, does not devote substantial attention to these activities. For a comprehensive discussion of the government's role in spying on and ultimately assisting in the destruction of the party, readers should consult his final book, War Against the Panthers, A Study of Repression in America. All right? So let's go here. I'm going to add a Q&A sticker. Superpower you would want. No. Let's change that. Okay. All right. Hold on. Wait. All right. Would you have joined the original Black Panthers? Let's put that here. Let's see if anybody wants to answer that. Okay. All right. Let's put that here. Let's see if there are any answers that'll pop up. Very interested to see if anybody wants to answer that. Anyway, continuing here. Okay, so As for his first book, Huey P. Newton's first book, Revolutionary Suicide, it was published at the peak of Huey's fame. Yet for all the exposure he had in media, the public still knew relatively little about his personal life, especially his childhood and his path to becoming a revolutionary. The courtroom prosecutors had strenuously sought to reduce him to a cop killer, and the press frequently cooperated in these efforts with a decidedly conservative slant in their reporting. Huey's autobiography, therefore, would serve the function Malcolm X's autobiography had a decade before. The book would humanize the icon with highly personal and candid recollections of a troubled past, along with accounts of the crucial birth of political consciousness that would redeem the author and allow him to make his mark on history. Revolutionary Suicide introduced readers to new and perhaps surprising elements of Huey's past, including such little-known facts as his being raised in a devoutly religious household by a minister father, growing up illiterate until he taught himself to read in order to prove that he was not stupid, and his teachers claimed, and that the Black Panther Party founders were not street hoodlums, but college classmates who turned to a revolutionary platform of armed self-defense after traditional forms of nonviolent protest proved ineffective and disappointing to them. But not everything Huey recalls is admirable, and he was not afraid to confess his participation in activities he later found shameful, like prostituting women and stealing from unlocked cars parked outside hospital emergency rooms. True to Huey's spirit, he took responsibility for his mistakes as well as his accomplishments. All right. Going here to the comments, BooJew24 says, the hard truth is that the American spirit died years ago and nationalism take another form nowadays. I'm not exactly sure what Buju is saying. Buju might be speaking a language other than English as his mother tongue. Therefore, he's not able to communicate as well as in English. I sympathize with you, brother Buju. If English is something you struggle with, I would just encourage you to maybe use Google Translate from your mother tongue to then copy and paste that into the chat if that's what you want to do to better be understood. Or using AI services now to communicate your ideas, because I have no idea what you're saying right there. Continuing. All right. Revolutionary Suicide was also written during a period of important transition in the party. Most notably, Eldridge Cleaver, the Minister of Information, defected from the party in 1971. In spite of his influential leadership role, Eldridge and Huey had uneasy relations from the start. The pair never agreed over what constituted serving the people meant. To Huey, that meant meeting the needs of poor and working class African Americans, while for Eldridge, it was leading the masses in armed rebellion. Eldridge's Revolution Now rhetoric frightened and alienated black communities, who were more concerned about jobs, housing, and decent education for their children. After his departure, the Black Panthers sought to reconnect to the people by launching an ambitious series of free services called survival programs. Through donations and volunteer support, the party provided groceries, medical care, and legal counsel, among other essential services, to tens of thousands of African Americans nationwide. The photographs taken at these public gatherings speak to the excitement of these events. On the one hand, or on the other hand, this was also a period of great sadness. A handful of the most respected Black Panther Party leaders were murdered in succession by government agents. Al Prentice, Bunchy Carter, Fred Hampton, John Huggins, George Jackson, and Bobby Hutton, to whom Huey dedicates Revolutionary Suicide, were all murdered by the state. Their contributions were enormous, and I can assure you that the loss of any one of these beloved comrades was felt far more profoundly than the loss of Eldridge or that of the small band of former members who followed him in this so-called split. All right. Buju is in the comments again. He just pointed up here and he translates it. I don't know what he is doing. Buju, you have to type it in English and translate it if you want to be understood. Your English is not that good as it is, and I encourage you to use the new technology that allows us to communicate across languages, across cultures, across nationalities much easier. Use AI, Use Google Translate. Use whatever it takes for you to be better understood, okay? Try to do that. Try to do that, because I don't know what this comment is saying. Continuing. It's fitting that Huey dedicated this book to Bobby Hutton, the first member to join the party after Huey and Bobby Seale, and the first Black Panther to be killed. Bobby was just 17 years old when, after a standoff, police gunned down the unarmed youth as he surrendered. Huey was devastated by the murder, but also clear-eyed enough to understand that a revolutionary is a doomed man. In other words, every revolutionary fighter, by definition, struggles against the power imbalance of the establishment, and the cost of this struggle is often paid with one's own life. Huey coined the term revolutionary suicide to describe this phenomenon, not to be confused with what he calls reactionary suicide, wherein a person kills himself in despair and helplessness. Revolutionary suicide is infused with the possibility that one's death will further the revolutionary cause. As Huey explains, it is better to oppose the forces that would drive me to self-murder than to endure them. Although I risk the likelihood of death, there is at least the possibility, if not the probability, of changing intolerable conditions. Revolutionary suicide does not mean that I and my comrades have a death wish. It means just the opposite. We have such a strong desire to live with hope and human dignity that existence without them is impossible. When reactionary forces crush us, we move against these forces, even at the risk of death. Bobby Hutton died a revolutionary suicide, and the publication of this new edition of Huey's autobiography will help ensure that readers for generations will remember him along with all the other fallen Black Panther Party comrades whose lives must not be forgotten. So when Huey is giving the title revolutionary suicide, he's basically saying, like, as a revolutionary, your life is doomed. You are going eventually to die because you are a human and eventually you will pass on. But also, you're facing innumerable odds, incredible odds that are against actual revolution, actual progress, actual liberation for the people. Not only from the outside, from the state, from the police, from the military, from society, from backwards reactionaries who will oppose you, but also, I would argue, and maybe Huey will make this argument, but I will assume, within yourself, within all of us, I believe we have reactionary attitudes, we have conservative beliefs, we have fascistic tendencies, I would even argue, exist within all human people, right? And so with that, we have to challenge that. We have to fight that. We have to go against that to eventually reach the point where we are in revolution, right? And the revolutionary, through his life being lived out, and eventually he will pass on. I'm assuming, this is what I'm going to assume that Huey will say, his argument will be. But my interpretation, based on just that quote right here, is that when eventually the revolutionary dies, whether he is murdered or whether he passes on through natural causes, that death is still a suicide because he chose to live his life in a doomed way that egged his death on further, rather than the reactionary suicide, which is somebody saying, I'm so sad, I'm so depressed, my wife left me, I lost my job, and I murked myself. That's not cool, okay? All right. Finally, I got my first Q&A. We got my first answer to the Q&A up in the chat. Shout out to all the people in the chat. Sumantel Bellagrosso says, Black Panthers broke off easily. Okay. So, and then he says, God makes mistakes too, flooded earth to start over, like Noah's Ark. This is also from Suman Mento Bellagrosso. Okay, very interesting answer. I like that answer, Suman Bellagrosso, though it's not really answering the question. I see we have some English as second speakers, English as second learners up in here. Who possibly, don't know yes or no questions or how to answer those type of questions. But the question is, would you have joined the Black Panthers? It's a yes or no, and then maybe a further explanation of why you would choose to join or not to join. But I'm very happy to see that the Q&A thing works, because I've been doing the Q&A before on previous live streams and have never gotten an answer. Very interesting. Anyway, let's continue here. So, after revolutionary suicide came out, the party experienced a period of turmoil that lasted until its demise about 7 years later. Intensified divisions within the organization were exacerbated by the infiltration of secret government agents who sought to bring down the party from within. False reports of comrades turning traitors led Huey to distrust and expel key party members, including Black Panther chairman and co-founder Bobby Seale. I didn't know that. I didn't know Huey expelled Bobby Seale. Wow. His successor, Chairman Elaine Brown, and Chief of Staff and childhood friend David Hilliard. Compounding Huey's government-inspired paranoia was his drug addiction, and his actions under the influence confounded and worried his allies. Huey's personal troubles climaxed in '74 when he was falsely charged with murdering an Oakland woman. Fearful that he would not receive a fair trial under California's Republican governor, Huey fled to Cuba, where he lived in exile until a Democrat was elected governor in 1976. As with his previous murder trial, Huey was once again acquitted. Unlike the previous trial, however, he did not return to the streets a hero. Huey's behavior became more erratic as his addiction worsened and the party slowly began to unravel. I found it endlessly heartbreaking to witness Huey's downward spiral. I urged him toward recovery repeatedly, but in spite of his valiant attempts, he never wanted a life without drugs more than he wanted the drug. His demons were too strong. In many respects, Huey came to feel that he had lived too long, that he had somehow outlived himself. Now, that's the worst feeling. Woo! That's a terrible feeling. Feeling like you outlived yourself. So, like, imagine you're like a 70-year-old man and you can no longer work. You can't even wipe your own ass, and everything around you is moving on without you. Wife, kids, the job that you used to have, society in general, and you're just stuck there watching TV on the couch. Yeah, you've outlived yourself. And there might be a feeling like, yeah, I should just commit that. But anyway, we're going to change this question. I want to see if I can change the question. Can I change the question? I can't even change the Q&A now. Okay, drag here to end the Q&A. Okay. Let's drag to end the Q&A. If y'all have any other questions, let me know. Or just type in the chat if you have something you want to say. Because even though I got one or two answers, it wasn't the best. Anyway, continuing. All right. I first met him at a brunch hosted by my mother in our Berkeley home in 1971. I was 19 years old, and unlike my mother, who was the party's real estate agent, not at all politically active. In fact, I was intimidated by the Black Panthers and used to cross the street to avoid walking past their Berkeley office. Although Huey had never met me, I was certain he'd read between the lines and write me off as a bourgeoisie college girl. Instead, I was surprised to discover him kind and patient with someone so obviously out of her element. He'd been acquitted of murdering the police officer and released from prison the previous summer. So I found the nerve incarcerated. He explained with great sensitivity that loneliness was the overwhelming emotion. I was so touched by his openness that my fears of Huey dropped away in that moment. No longer the world-famous figure in the wicker chair, here was a man with fears and emotions just like anyone. I immediately felt compassion and protectiveness toward him. He phoned later that day to invite me to his home, and we began our affair that night. I quickly joined the party, first teaching in one of its schools, then as a cadre member working on the Black Panther newspaper at the party's central headquarters. Our relationship, along with my tenure with the Black Panthers, was short-lived, however. Huey fled to Cuba, and I decided to return to college and complete my studies. When I returned home following graduation in 1976, I ran into Huey at a Santana concert, and we resumed an on-again, off-again relationship that culminated in our marriage in 1984. Aww, look at that situationship. Revolutionary situationship. You know, they say communists have the best sex. Communists have the best sex. Continuing, although I'd known of or been involved with Huey for years, our decision to marry was sudden. He phoned me from out of the blue to propose, and 1 week later we were married in Reno. But the haste with which we wed largely characterized our relationship. There was an unspoken, even prevailing sense between us that our life together was fleeting. Some of Huey's closest comrades in the party had been gunned down, and the constant presence of an armed bodyguard in our lives was a daily reminder that Huey might meet the same fate. Of course, we attempted to live our lives as if we were an ordinary family. flying kites with my son from a previous marriage, and taking him on picnics and to the pumpkin patch for Halloween. But there was no denying the reality that Huey was and always would be a threat to the establishment. The government retaliated in a variety of ways. The IRS put a lien against our assets, our home was raided and ransacked by the police twice, and Huey was charged with and later acquitted of the illegal possession of a gun. In the process, we lost our home and became homeless, living with friends and relatives wherever possible. Throughout this ordeal, we nevertheless struggled to maintain some semblance of a happy family life. Much has been written about Huey's final years and the demise of the party. I would encourage anyone interested in these details to read David Hilliard's This Side of Glory and Huey, Spirit of the Panther. These books provide a candid insider's account of Huey's tragic freefall by a lifelong comrade who saved his own life by becoming a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. As it happens, much has also been written about these events by self-proclaimed authorities, primarily journalists and professors who, in order to call attention to their work, stooped to portraying Huey and the party in exclusively outlandish terms. J. Edgar Hoover himself could not perform a more thorough assassination of character, and I'm left to wonder what function these politically motivated attacks serve other than to advance the careers of these authors. As president of the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation, the nonprofit organization I helped establish to remember Huey and the party, I welcome responsible historical reassessments and hope that this new edition of Revolutionary Suicide assists in that purpose. Although this book was published more than 25 years ago, it remains the definitive account of Huey's life and Black Panther history. He never got around to writing a sequel, which would have included, among other highlights, the PhD he earned from the University of Santa Cruz, selections from his academic writings, along with a comprehensive collection of seminal essays written during his Black Panther tenure, can be found in the Huey P. Newton Reader. Sadly, Huey did not live to see the publication of the Reader or the addition of Revolutionary Suicide into the distinguished Penguin Classics Library. He was murdered in 1989 by a drug dealer who claimed he killed the former party leader in order to get respect and become a shot caller for the gang he belonged to. Still, Huey would have been thrilled to see this new edition of his autobiography. He understood that whether he lived or died, the crucial point was that his work would live on, that the people would carry on the fight in his absence. As Huey tells us, I will fight until I die, however that may come. But whether I'm around or not to see it happen, I know that the transformation of society inevitably will manifest the true meaning of all power to the people. Although this transformation has yet to be realized these many years later, Revolutionary Suicide reminds us that one intrepid person can help promote the process that brings about revolutionary change. Frederica Newton, written in 2009. Beautiful, beautiful introduction. Very good writer. Love the flow of that writing. Very easy to follow. I'm going to take a quick water break. Yes, Lord. All right. Now what we're going to do, we're going to read briefly the acknowledgments, and then we're going to read the manifesto section after a tribute to Lil Bobby and the acknowledgments. And the manifesto section is, I believe, Huey's first time speaking through the text, and that will be where we'll end it after we finish reading that. Okay? Let's go. Acknowledgments. So, for their generous support through good times and bad, which enabled me to complete this book, I am indebted to my brother Melvin Newton, my secretary Gwen V. Fontaine, my good friends and comrades Donald Freed, Bert Schneider, and David Horowitz, and my editors Edwin Barber and Ethel Cunningham. There are many others who have been generously there are many others who have given generously of their time and efforts to make this book possible. Many friends of Herman Blake accompanied him on trips to the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo during the early phases of the book. Their help with driving during those arduous days made it possible for us to devote all our energies to the book. I am grateful to each one of them, even though it is not possible to list them by name. I also wish to acknowledge the contributions of Diane Martin and Sabra Slaughter for doing some of the early research, Kathy Harris, Delois Burby, Barbara Lee, Linda Cohey, Catherine Hall, and Joanne Stericker for typing transcripts and manuscripts. Careful proofreadings of the book at various stages was done by Donna Healy, Mrs. Bessie Blake, and daughters Audrey, Lilace, and Vanessa. Juanita Jackson gave continuous support and encouragement, as well as some of the best gumbo I have ever tasted. Finally, Alex Haley provided valuable advice and encouragement in the early phases of this work. Each one has made an important contribution to this book. All right, lovely. Now, on to Huey P. Newton, finally speaking. He says, a tribute to Lil Bobby. Lil Bobby was the beginning, the very first member of the Black Panther Party. He gave not only his finances, he gave himself. He placed himself in the service of his people and asked nothing in return, not even a needle or a piece of thread. He asked neither security nor high office. But he demanded those things that are the birthright of all men, dignity and freedom. He demanded this for himself and for his people. Like a bright ray of light moving across the sky, Lil Bobby came into our lives and showed us the beauty of our people. He was a living example of an infinite love for his people and for freedom. Now he has moved on, and the example he gave will serve as a beacon that lights our way and leads us on in the struggle for life, dignity, and freedom. We salute Lil Bobby and his family for what they have given us. He was the beginning of the party. Let us make sure that his thinking, his desires for his people become a way of life. Yours forever, Huey P. Newton, Minister of Defense, Black Panther Party, published April 1968. Revolutionary Suicide, a poem by Huey P. Newton. And it goes something like this. By having no family, I inherited the family of humanity. By having no possessions, I have possessed all. By rejecting the love of one, I received the love of all. By surrendering my life to the revolution, I found eternal life. Revolutionary Suicide. Going now to Huey P. Newton, A Manifesto is the title. Let a new earth rise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and a strength of final clenching be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control. This was, that was written by Margaret Walker from For My People. Sorry, that wasn't Huey P. Newton. Misattribution. No, going here now. This is from Huey. Revolutionary Suicide, The Way of Liberation. 2 months in the California men's colony at San Luis Obispo after my first trial for the death of patrolman John Frey. I was almost continually in solitary confinement. There, in a 4x6 cell, except for books and papers relating to my case, I was allowed no reading material. Despite the rigid enforcement of this rule, inmates sometimes slipped magazines under my door when the guards were not looking. One that reached me was the May 1970 issue of Ebony magazine. It contained an article written by Lacey Banco summarizing the work of Dr. Herbert Hendon, who had done a comparative study on suicide among black people in the major American cities. Dr. Hendon found that the suicide rates among black men between the ages of 19 and 35 had doubled in the past 10 to 15 years, surpassing the rate for whites in the same age range. The article had and still has a profound effect on me. I have thought long and hard about its implications. Wow, okay, so it's very interesting that they were talking about the suicide rate for black boys going up back then in like the 70s. You know what I mean? Because now they're talking about the suicide rate for young black men is even higher. And I'd be lying if I say I never thought of suicide. You know what I mean? So, c'est la vie. The Ebony article brought to mind Durkheim's classic study, Suicide, a book I had read earlier while studying sociology at Oakland City College. Man, it's so crazy. Like, I'm studying sociology right now in university, and my heroes, all my heroes, study some type of sociology. And Durkheim's study on suicide is like one of the first things that you learn about when you're studying sociology. So it's so trippy. The Huey P. Newton was also from Monroe, Louisiana, going to college at a later age in his life, reading some of the same texts that I'm reading right now, man. It's just trippy, man. It's really trippy. Anyway, to Durkheim, all types of suicide are related to social conditions. He maintains that the primary cause of suicide is not individual temperament, but forces in the social environment. In other words, suicide is caused primarily by external factors, not internal ones. As I thought about the conditions of black people and about Dr. Hendon's study, I began to develop Durkheim's analysis and apply it to the black experience in the United States. This eventually led to the concept of revolutionary suicide. To understand revolutionary suicide, it is first necessary to have an idea of reactionary suicide, for the two are very different. Dr. Hendon was describing reactionary suicide, the reaction of a man who takes his own life in response to social conditions that overwhelm him and condemn him to helplessness. The young black men in his study had been deprived of human dignity, crushed by oppressive forces, and denied their right to live as proud and free human beings. A section in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment provides a good analogy. One of the characters, Marmeladov, a very poor man, argues that poverty is not a vice. In poverty, he says, a man can attain the innate nobility of soul that is not possible in beggary. For while society may drive the poor man out with a stick, the beggar will be swept out with a broom. Why? Because the beggar is totally demeaned, his dignity lost. Finally, bereft of self-respect, immobilized by fear and despair, he sinks into self-murder. This is reactionary suicide. I read Crime and Punishment many, many years ago when I was in high school. One of my favorite books. I really liked it. I did not expect to like it. It wasn't even assigned to me by like a high school teacher or anything like that. I just randomly picked it up one day, like this dusty book on the shelf, and like blew through it in like a week and a half. It's a very thick book, right? And yeah, absolutely loved it. Very powerful story. I should reread it again. Anyway, connected to reactionary suicide, although even more painful and degrading, is a spiritual death that has been the experience of millions of black people in the United States. This death is found everywhere today in the black community. Its victims have ceased to fight the forms of oppression that drink their blood. The common attitude has been, what's the use? If a man rises up against a power as great as the United States, he will not survive. Believing this, many blacks have been driven to a death of the spirit rather than of the flesh, lapsing into lives of quiet desperation. Yet all the while, in the heart of every black, there is the hope that life will somehow change in the future. I do not think that life will change for the better without an assault on the establishment, which goes on exploiting the wretched of the earth. This belief lies at the heart of the concept of This belief lies at the heart of the concept of revolutionary suicide. Thus it is better to oppose the forces that would drive me to self-murder than to endure them. Although I risk the likelihood of death, there is at least the possibility, if not the probability, of changing intolerable conditions. This possibility is important because much in human existence is based upon hope without any real understanding of the odds. Indeed, we are all, black and white alike, ill in the same way, mortally ill. But before we die, how shall we live? I say with hope and dignity. I say we live with hope and dignity. And if premature death is the result, that death has a meaning reactionary suicide can never have, it is the price of self-respect. Revolutionary suicide does not mean that I and my comrades have a death wish. It means just the opposite. We have such a strong desire to live with hope and human dignity that existence without them is impossible. When reactionary forces crush us, we must move against these forces, even at the risk of death. We will have to be driven out with a stick. He talking. Che Guevara said that to a revolutionary, death is the reality and victory, the dream. Once again, Che Guevara said that to a revolutionary, death is the reality and victory, the dream. Because the revolutionary lives so dangerously, his survival is a miracle. Bakunin, who spoke for the most militant wing of the First International, made a similar statement in his Revolutionary Catechism. To him, the first lesson a revolutionary must learn is that he is a doomed man, said Bakunin. Unless he understands this, he does not grasp the essential meaning of his life. When Fidel Castro and his small band were in Mexico preparing for the Cuban Revolution, many of the comrades had little understanding of Bakunin's rule. A few hours before they set sail, Fidel went from man to man asking who should be notified in case of death. Only then did the deadly seriousness of the revolution hit home. Their struggle was no longer romantic. The scene had been exciting and animated, but when the simple, overwhelming question of death arose, everyone fell silent. Many so-called revolutionaries in this country, black and white, and by the way, Huey P. Newton capitalized black and put the lowercase on white. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be, baby. Anyway. Many so-called revolutionaries in this country, black and white, are not prepared to accept this reality. The Black Panthers are not suicidal. Neither do we romanticize the consequences of revolution in our lifetime. Other so-called revolutionaries cling to an illusion that they might have their revolution and die of old age. That cannot be. I do not expect to live through our revolution, and most serious comrades probably share my realism. Therefore, the expression revolution in our lifetime means something different to me than it does to other people who use it. I think the revolution will grow in my lifetime, but I do not expect to enjoy its fruits. That would be a contradiction. The reality will be grimmer. I have no doubt that the revolution will triumph. The people of the world will prevail, seize power, seize the means of production, wipe out racism, capitalism, reactionary intercommunalism, reactionary suicide. The people will win in a new world. Yet when I think of individuals in the revolution, I cannot predict their survival. Revolutionaries must accept this fact, especially the black revolutionaries in America, whose lives are in constant danger from the evils of a colonial society. Considering how we must live, it is not hard to accept the concept of revolutionary suicide. In this, we are different from white radicals. They are not faced with genocide. The greater, more immediate problem is the survival of the entire world. If the world does not change, all its people will be threatened by the greed, exploitation, and violence of the power structure in the American empire. That's the most important sentence we've read today. The most important group of sentences, because it's really two. And it's so relevant to what's happening in America and the world right now. Let's read that sentence again. The greater, more immediate problem is the survival of the entire world, said Huey P. Newton. If the world does not change, all its people will be threatened by the greed, exploitation, and violence of the power structure in the American empire. Cut it off. Cut it off. Cut it off. That's so relevant. This was written over what? 40 years ago. 40 years ago. No, more than 40 years ago. 50 years ago. 50 years ago, and still highly relevant. We just saw what happened in Venezuela. We saw what Trump is saying about Greenland and how he is acting with the European powers who are in NATO, and how he is sending out Gestapo thugs to murder American citizens, and everybody is next on the chopping block. Everybody is next to be shot by these racist Gestapo thugs. We're all next on the chopping block. And yet and still, there are people that worship America, that love America, that believe in these American ideals. We have to abolish America. We have to abolish America. I'm going to continue here. Anyway, the handwriting is on the wall, said Huey P. Newton. The United States is jeopardizing its own existence and the existence of all humanity. If Americans knew the disasters that lay ahead, they would transform this society tomorrow for their own preservation. The Black Panther Party is in the vanguard of the revolution that seeks to relieve this country of its crushing burden of guilt. We are determined to establish true equality and the means of creative work. So powerful, so relevant, so prophetic. He is saying America is on a war path. It's on a war path that will lead to its own destruction and the entire world's destruction. Man, that's so deep. It's so real. I'm going to continue here. So, some see our struggle as a symbol of the trend towards suicide among blacks. Scholars and academics in particular have been quick to make this accusation. They fail to perceive differences. Jumping off a bridge is not the same as moving to wipe out the overwhelming force of an oppressive army. When scholars call our actions suicidal, they should be logically consistent and describe all historical revolutionary movements in the same way. Thus, the American colonists, the French of the late 18th century, the Russians of 1917, the Jews of Warsaw, the Cubans, the NLF, the North Vietnamese, any people who struggle against a brutal and powerful force are suicidal. Also, if the Black Panthers symbolize the suicidal trend among blacks, then the whole third world is suicidal, because the third world fully intends to resist and overcome the ruling class of the United States. Once again, Huey P, in his own book, at the very beginning, before we even talk about chapter 1, we're still in the introduction, and Huey P is talking about international solidarity with the Cubans, with the NLF, with the North Vietnamese, with the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto, with the Russians of 1917 who overthrew the oligarchs and the capitalist overlords in their country, and the czars and the monarchs and all of that. With the French, who in the 18th century killed their kings and shit like that. Huey P. Newton is talking about international solidarity in the very beginning of his book. So where are the people who are saying the Black Panthers are only black nationalists, who are only concerned about black American issues? That is not the case. That is not the case at all. From the founder of the Black Panthers, that is not the case. I'm going to continue here. If scholars wish to carry their analysis further, they must come to terms with that 4/5 of the world which is bent on wiping out the power of the empire. In those terms, the third world would be transformed from suicidal to homicidal. Woo! Although homicidal is the unlawful taking of life, and the third world is involved only in defense. Is the coin then turned? Is the government of the United States suicidal? I think so. With this redefinition, the term revolutionary suicide is not as simplistic as it might seem initially. In coining the phrase, I took two knowns and combined them to make an unknown, a nouteric phrase in which the word revolutionary transforms the word suicide into an idea that has different dimensions and meanings, applicable to a new and complex situation. My prison experience is a good example of revolutionary suicide in action. For prison is a microcosm of the outside world. From the beginning of my sentence, I defied the authorities by refusing to cooperate. As a result, I was confined to lockup, a solitary cell. As the months passed and I remained steadfast, they came to regard my behavior as suicidal. I was told that I would crack and break under the strain. I did not break, nor did I retreat from my position. I grew strong. If I had submitted to their exploitation and done their will, it would have killed my spirit and condemned me to a living death. To cooperate in prison meant reactionary suicide to me. While solitary confinement can be physically and mentally destructive, my actions were taken with an understanding of the risk. I had to suffer through a certain situation. By doing so, my resistance told them that I rejected all that they stood for. Even though my struggle might have harmed my health, even killed me, I looked upon it as a way of raising the consciousness of the other inmates, as a contribution to the ongoing revolution. Only resistance can destroy the pressures that cause reactionary suicide. The concept of revolutionary suicide is not defeatist or fatalistic. On the contrary, it conveys an awareness of reality in combination with the possibility of hope. Reality, because the revolutionary must always be prepared to face death, and hope, because it symbolizes a resolute determination to bring about change. Above all, it demands that the revolutionary see his death and his life as one piece. Chairman Mao says that death comes to us all, but it varies in its significance. To die for the reactionary is lighter than a feather. To die for the revolution is heavier than Mount Tai, said Chairman Mao. Once again, to die for the reactionary is lighter than a feather. To die for the revolution is heavier than Mount Tai. Sometimes I want to say revolutionary because those words are coming so quick back to back. Revolutionary. So pardon me sometimes if I'm making mistakes while doing the reading here. But we're gonna start here on chapter 1 tomorrow. As you see right here, part 1. During those long years in the Oakland public schools, I did not have one teacher who taught me anything relevant to my own life or experience. Woo! Okay. All right. Well, spitting on teachers now. That's how we're starting. We're going to pick up here on chapter 1 in our next reading tomorrow. Hopefully you enjoyed our first dive in to Huey P. Newton's work. And we will be continuing revolutionary suicide throughout the week, through all of February. I mean, it just now hit me. Tomorrow is Black History Month. Tomorrow is the beginning of Black History Month, and we're starting a very good book for Black History Month, Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. Hopefully this won't be the only book we read for Black History Month, and hopefully there are some other people who have other texts that they think might be very good for us to read as well. And yeah, this was my first time doing the double live stream. Hopefully it was more engaging. I see we got more engagement on the vertical stream than we do the horizontal one. So, hey, whatever it takes to get people to come in, to listen, to read, to engage, to be involved in education and learning, that's all I'm here to do. So I want to give a shout out to everybody here. Mork the Orc 69. Shout out to Mork the Orc. Shout out to Sumamente Bellagrosso 4840, sorry. Tim Nicholas 4605, shout out to you. Shout out to Marcika in the chat. Shout out to Buju or Bujo 24. And shout out to everybody else who's going to watch this in the playback. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Y'all be easy out there, and peace.